Welcome to CultivatED Marketer, where we talk marketing professional development so your garden of opportunity grows. This is Brent Bowen.
And I'm Matt Tidwell.
And we don't have a guest this time. Matt and I have decided, you know what? We've had 5 guests. We've done 7 episodes now. Our last episode with our guest was so well done and so well, I don't know about well done, but it was so well received and the guest was so great that we decided to break it into 2 parts. We thought this might be a great time to press pause and reflect on some of our guests, and then also share some of the thoughts that we have about some upcoming guests as well.
Yeah, hit a little reset, but also allude to some things coming that hopefully people will be interested in. And I just want to thank you for having, this is the first time we've been actually in the studio together. So that's nice. That's definitely progress. We'll count that as progress. So I haven't had a chance to see not only all your equipment, which is terrific, but I feel like I'm kind of on a Comic-Con setting here. I've got Yoda over my left shoulder. I've got other characters, a gnome and other things that I'm sure there are all stories behind, but it's cool to be here in the live with you, first of all, but also in this really cool facility. It's great.
Yeah. If you think about it, the last time you and I were able to we've stayed in contact and done episodes, but really the last time we were able to do something live together, it was February.
It was February at Edwards campus at KCIABC, their terrific business communicators summit. And we were able to knock off a bunch of guests there at once. Yeah. But other than that, we've been virtual. So very cool to be here live.
Yeah. Glad to have you here live. So in the home studio, we're recording this in the new Bowen home studio. And as to continue the metaphor of Yoda, leering over Matt's shoulders, this thing is Death Star operational, not quite fully operational, but like Death Star operate, just enough to do a little damage in here today.
Yeah, I think it looks great. And, really, when we talk marketing and professional development and mentoring, and what greater mascot for us than Yoda, right? So,
do or do not. There is no try.
There is no try.
There is no try. That's kind of the mantra we're living by.
Right. Moving ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of mantras, I think each of our guests over the last, we really had the show going now, believe it or not, it's been 9 months that a lot of our guests have brought a different mantra or a different sensibility and experiences to the show. And even, you go back to Mike, we've all had a year of transition. There are some memes going out around when can we start using 2020 as a swear word, but nobody embodied this notion of transition probably as much as Mike in talking, the conversation we had with him on at least the second half around, he talked really about an entire career journey. Yeah. And then culminating in a next act, which was kind of the second part of that conversation.
Yeah. And kind of a very common story for a lot of us in marketing. Started off with, kind of a traditional journalism path, a news journalist, and then moved into politics and morphed from politics to what we would think of as marketing communications. And of course, ended up, just being an agency leader for decades and really doing some of the real cool projects in town. And so I was really glad to get Mike on. Glad we split it up into 2 episodes. He had that much wisdom for everybody. But no, I liked what you said about just different viewpoints, because marketing is multifaceted and, different industries have a certain take on it, different experience levels. There's a certain perspective. And so I think we've had a nice cross spectrum there, right? Mm-hmm. So people who, were more on the agency side or maybe more on the industry side that have transitioned to academia. When you think about somebody like maybe Angie Pastorek, who we started off with early, but had also had a professional career. So change is the only constant, particularly in marketing. And I think we've been able to see some of that in the first little tranche of guests that we had.
Oh yeah. We've been able to see that idea that change is the only constant, but you touch on Angie and Kathryn and those conversations too. And you talk about the different experiences and the different skills that are related to marketing. And as part of those conversations, we talked about what can academia bring to the conversation. And Kathryn is a recruiter. As part of her role as a recruiter, what I took a lot from those conversations was anymore in our world, it seems like we're living in a world within marketing that it requires a certain level of specialty to be able to perform your job and perform it well. The notion of the Ben Zobrist utility player being respected, those utility players in marketing seem to be about as respected as they are in baseball, which it takes somebody the quality of a Ben Zobrist to be kind of respected. We need to have Ben Heisler back over here to talk sports with us again. But, it seems almost, so those conversations we had with Kathryn around, how do you jumpstart a specialty? How do you get really connected and deep quickly within a specialty to be able to function in today's world? Those are two of those experiences, one from a hard skill standpoint where we were talking with Kathryn, but then on the flip side, back to back, it was perfect guest where we had Angie on the soft skills side saying, that's part of the constant of being able to be a good team player too. That notion of today's world of marketing, those two guests really stood out to me.
The term that we kind of landed on that we all liked was professional skills, right?
Yes.
The soft skills tends to get kind of overused and can be frowned upon from time to time, but so whatever you call it, it's definitely, it's the secret sauce that I think so many times is important, particularly for people that see themselves as being a leader in the field, that, down through the career. But yeah, no, I think both of those guests were great to start off with. And yeah, I think Kathryn's points about specialization were very well taken. When I broke into the business, it was more common for marketers to be more or less generalists, right? Mm-hmm. Because we hadn't really hit the wave of technology yet. Go ahead and date myself. I came in the very late 80s, and I can still remember the first fax machine coming into the publishing company that I worked with as a young journalist at the time, as a trade journalist. And that was, it's like, wow, this is this thing. You can actually trade documents back and forth without having to put them in the mail or mail press kits like we used to do back in the day, right? We'd have these big lines where we'd all assemble the press kits and mail them. But we were essentially generalists. There wasn't a lot of specialization in the marketing field. Now, explosion, right? You have to be, if you don't know a lot about a certain technology, you better at least know where to find that answer and find it quickly, And so, and good, luckily there's good resources for doing that, but it speaks to being nimble. It speaks to, being very, very diverse in your approach. I think Ben talked a little bit about that, just having a real diversity in the sense of having a multi-tool kind of a kit. So yeah, I think that good stuff. And hopefully this conversation, if folks haven't gone back and had a chance to listen to some of those perspectives, they can do so.
Yeah, they can take this as a cue and go back and listen to any one of those guests. And when you were speaking about Ben, the aforementioned Ben was not Ben Zobrist, but Ben Heisler. And, Ben, again, we talk about this area of specialization. He was a great guest from the standpoint of having to reinvent himself. Yep. You're talking about this notion of being able to maybe not have the answer right away, or maybe just having an interest and the aptitude. And then how do you close that gap from aptitude to where you can demonstrate expertise? And Ben, talked about that. And he also talked about informational interviews, because in the time we're in now, I don't know how many times you see this each week, but you go on LinkedIn and you see I see probably about once a week, at least, the post out there going, hey, if you're unemployed and I've ever worked with you and I've ever known you, reach out. I'm here to help, which I think it's a great sense of community for people to be able to do that. And it's great that they're doing that. But the flip side of that, and what I really took from Ben's conversation, Ben struck me as a lifelong learner and a lifelong connector, because he was talking about the notion of informational interviews and always looking to grow from each and every conversation he had. So that's something that stuck out for me with that conversation, particularly with his transition. He needed to do that.
Well, talk about challenges, landing a job in the midst of a global pandemic. It's not easy to do, but he pulled it off. And you're right. Yeah. He approached it from the right mindset that, I'm going to take those informational interviews or request those informational interviews, even if there's not a lot of chance for, or if the organization isn't maybe hiring right at the moment. I still want to get familiar with who they are and learn more about their perspective. And that's important. And it's a two-way street, right? So I think it's part of mentorship as well. When you advance in the profession, you got to be willing to do things like that. So, and yeah, it's been cool to see all of the the folks post on their LinkedIn that they're ready to help for some of the people that we know are out there struggling, because, folks have lost jobs, and I certainly know a few, and you may know as well, that either pre-pandemic for whatever reasons, layoffs, et cetera, a couple of people that are in that boat that, that happened to them on the front side. And so then trying to find that job during the pandemic is difficult as well.
Yeah, no, matter of fact, I had a conversation with someone I know. I serve on a board with this individual within town for an arts organization, and she worked at an event planning group. So a function of marketing, and there's only so much juice to go around on the virtual event sphere, and it still doesn't require the same logistics, the same resources. And so a lot of those types of organizations, and event planning goes deep back to my days at KU. I was in one of the student run organizations at the University of Kansas, student union activities that did a lot of the event planning there. So that kind of runs deep in my soul. It's quite an experience to pull off in a live event project, right? So a lot of those folks have lost jobs, and she's finding herself and we had a conversation yesterday about she's reinventing herself a little bit and creating her own business, and we're going to help her launch a website. But which that experience kind of reminds me, probably goes all the way back to our first guest, to John Hall, and the conversation we had there where, Ben kind of took it one step further around basically extending those conversations and turning it into a learning opportunity. But John was really the one that provided some great tips around how do you start to develop a relationship. You remember we talked about top of mind with him.
Yep, top of mind, and which I think was the title of his presentation to IABC that day. And he was a great guest to kick off with, because those are themes that we want to carry forward, throughout the show, even as we move forward. I'm just sorry we didn't get a chance to. John's now turned some of his attention to effective time management, right, with the whole calendar.com thing. We got so. Appropriately so. We got busy talking about the subject of our show, and I would have loved to have explored that more with him, but only so many minutes in a segment, right?
So only so many minutes in a segment.
You've taught me that here.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, we're even considered long form here, right? Right. Yeah. We're breaking down this to radio segments. We've been done in 3 minutes and you're out, or a TV segment. Yeah. I would have loved to talk to time with John. We did a little bit more from a feature functionality standpoint and some of the capabilities that they had with calendar.com, but that's become a real issue in the work from home culture during the pandemic, or the boundary, work.
How do you set boundaries? When do you turn off? My wife and I have had conversations about that too. It's just because I'm still working primarily from home. She's in the office about 95% of the time. She's got some office management duties at her place of business. And so, I think that a lot of households are that way. And so, the traditional even roles and patterns of daily life have been really, really disrupted. But I'm itching to get back out. I think a lot of us in marketing are extroverts, right? And so, we become caged animals after so long. But so that's another reason I'm glad we're here in person today.
We're here to do this.
So this feels great. This feels great.
Yeah. You're probably a lot like me though, Matt. You're probably, because I know you do a little moonlighting around some professional sports. It seems like the one thing from a boundary standpoint, client, not client, coworker, peer, boss, they seem to understand this halo around the Chiefs.
Of course.
So it's like, hey man, the Chiefs game's on. Don't call me during the Chiefs game. Seriously. And the beauty of that is because of the pandemic. If there was a silver lining to the pandemic, it's been that the games have been on Tuesdays. They've been on Thursdays. They've been like, we might as well run Chiefs games 7 days a week. And then we'll know they've started at like 3:30 in the afternoon on a whatever that was, a Tuesday
Another
or Monday
traditional
night football
pattern to things that's been completely turned upside down, right? Although there are still some axioms, I would still say, do not go to Costco 2 hours before kickoff of a Chiefs game. You're never going to get through the checkout line. That's true, pandemic or no.
Yeah, pandemic or no, I believe it. Well, that's behavioral. Right. We've got some behavioral things that we have an interesting behavioral guest coming up.
We do. And I'm a good transition, because I'd love for us to talk about some of the people that we're talking about in terms of our next tranche of guests, and we've reached out to them, and these are going to be folks that you're going to be hearing soon.
I don't know if Grant studied Costco behavior.
May not have, but we're going to be welcoming Grant Gooding, who you're referring to there. Grant's a local marketing guy who's I've heard speak 2 or 3 times now, and it's fascinating. He centers around this area. He calls it emotional data, but he's a brilliant analytics guy and certainly a very sophisticated marketing researcher. So he'll be, of course, able to talk about that, which I think will definitely be very interesting. But also been around for a long time, mentored a lot of younger marketers. I think we'll absolutely be able to talk about professional development as well with Grant, in addition to his very specific take on analytics from the perspective of emotional data. Really excited to have Grant on. So he's going to be a great guest coming out of the shoot. And then some other people that probably, one that I would mention is Jessica Best. Jessica's been at Barkley, a great local agency that we all know for a long time.
And Influence before that.
Jessica, and many of you may have heard Jessica, but every time I hear her, I get something new. Because, her specialty over the last few years, and I've had her come in to speak to my classes, has been around email marketing.
Yes.
And we've sort of been conditioned or prodded into thinking that, email marketing may not be that effective a tool, but she's here to beg to differ. And you've probably heard her speak as well. And so I think let's get into, when we have her in, let's remind ourselves to make sure we get into that with her, because she's got a very specific take around email marketing that I think people may find very refreshing. Definitely not dead. I'll give a little preview there.
Oh yeah. What's old is new again around email. I'm interested to talk with her about ROI of email.
Yep.
Of all what the value is. I saw a study recently where it showed the type of marketing channel. So if you're able to acquire an email lead versus a Facebook follower versus a click to a website, what the ROI is on each of those data points or elements. And it showed that email had the highest ROI and was worth $40 for an email address.
Wow.
And that was kind of a baseline across all industries. So it just kind of struck me, what's old is new again. Time to definitely talk to Jessica.
Yeah. The other interesting thing I think about Jessica is this is a person that's really creating. We talk all the time about creating your brand and really finding your niche and building your brand. And she's really done that well. I mean, she speaks around the country on this topic. And of course, many of us were one of these experts that we're really glad that is here local so that we can tap into her knowledge and expertise. But she's been pretty methodical and very strategic about building her brand. And so I think she probably would have some good things to say in that vein as well.
And when I see Jessica, generally it's at a good eatery too. So I may pick her brain on some of the best eateries for takeout, if you don't mind.
Oh, no. Absolutely.
All right. So last time I saw her at the Russell. We were having lunch at a couple tables apart from one another. So I might pick her brain on the next best eatery.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple other folks I might just mention, Ben, that we've talked to. We're real excited to have join us. This is a lady that I worked with, 20 plus years ago. Both of us were at a local large agency that had 3-letter initials. And Kristen Petrillo Majdanix, we'll get that name right before Kristen comes on. Kristen is now the Senior VP Marketing for Firehouse Subs. And I heard her not long ago on another podcast that happened to be related to crisis communications, which is an interesting area of mine, talking about the challenges that big national brands have in a pandemic kind of environment. And whether that be earlier in the pandemic or now, as things, have continued to open up and, those kinds of challenges and opportunities. So Kristen's a local person, University of Missouri, worked in the agency business, as I mentioned here, with many of us a couple decades ago. And then, as people are wont to do, moved out to the coast. I think now she's actually in Florida, which is where the Firehouse sub headquarters is. But really excited to get Kristen in because she'll have a unique take as well on not just career path, but also obviously working in a segment, the heavy B2C that many of our listeners, I'm sure, are interested in.
Yeah, the B2C component. And I was just kidding about the restaurant situation. I didn't intend to segue into that. We're transitioning well again, but you said crisis communication. There are probably few industries that have been hit quite as hard as the restaurant industry, the food industry with the pandemic. I mean, I'm sure there are several others that have been hit nearly as hard, but it'd be interesting to talk to her and get her perspective on how they dealt with that, COVID shutdowns, those types of situations. I was, at a pharmacy, but a couple weeks ago, and we were about ready to walk into the pharmacy to pick up a prescription. And the store manager stopped out and said, the store's been closed immediately until further notice, which kind of told me that either there was a gas leak or there was a known infection.
Sure.
Right. So I have one retail client that's food industry, as you know, and I've been sharing a lot of crisis messaging on if there's anything from a traceability standpoint. Fortunately, knock on wood, I have no wood to knock on. I have a board sitting out at the outside here.
We found a hole in the new studio here that Brent's going to need to fix.
I need just a block of wood that you and I could just knock, just knock on. But we've been fortunate to not have one of the restaurant owners have a case. Right. So, and I'm sure with the footprint that they have, Kristen will be able to speak to that. It'd be good to chat with her about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just, and talking to some other people as well, a young PR pro here, strategic communicator in town, Andy Diorio. I know you know Andy a little bit. Really excited to get Andy on. He and I have worked together a fair amount over the years. He's on my advisory board for our master's degree program at KU, has his own shop now, but doing strategic communications very well. Has also a person that really has put a lot of thought into building his brand and building his corner of expertise. He has a really interesting kind of mini video vignette kinds of series that he's done on LinkedIn and other kinds of things, which I think is really interesting. Maybe to get him to talk some about that. But has also worked for big brands. So he was at Hallmark for a while. I was also at H&R Block, or no, not H&R Block, Hallmark. He was definitely at Hallmark, AMC Theaters.
He was at AMC Theaters,
Hallmark, I think. And I think he actually started at Sprint. So
he and I worked together. Had some overlap at Sprint, and then he also was at Lockton. And if I'm not mistaken, Andy's also a cancer survivor.
He is. Yeah, he absolutely is. So he's got some interesting background, but just really impressed with him. He's been willing to do so much for me in terms of some students we've had and mentoring them. And he's probably, maybe 10, 15 years behind maybe you and I, but has I think a really interesting perspective on career growth. So looking forward to getting Andy in as well.
Yeah.
So we got some cool guests coming up.
We have some great guests. Some very cool guests coming up. Well, and folks, we're excited that you were hanging out with me and Matt to hear us kind of give a little bit of a retrospective on our, first several months together. Very excited to have you participate and listen to us as we bring on some additional guests. So any before we sign off, any kind of closing thoughts or remarks on just kind of our first months together in this wild world of 2020.
It's been great. I can still remember you and I think we were grabbing a quick bite to eat at the IBC World Conference in Vancouver. And we just kind of said, it'd be cool to kind of take the podcast format and really drill down into professional development and what it takes to build your career and advance your career. And it's been cool to see that, come to fruition in the way that it has. And certainly very excited to continue over the next few months. And it's been fun to see emails dribble in saying, hey, heard the episode with Mike. It was really cool. And hadn't heard from him in a while. Good to know what he's got going on and where he's going. So just to, building community, right? Building community is what it's all about.
Yeah. And I anybody that's within a marketing member organization here in the Kansas City area, if you happen to be listening, want to give a shout out to you. If you've been sharing the show or listening to the show, as Matt's talking about community, we've had several organizations I know reach out to us and they've proactively shared the show with their members. Or I know, Matt, you were invited as a guest to speak to a group for KCIABC a little bit about your experiences here with doing the show with me.
Yeah.
So, and which I hope they were kind to me along the way, but we want to give a shout out and thanks to all the marketing member organizations. I mean, that's part of the reason why we're doing this is to extend that conversation that you have each and every month. And we're hoping you're still able to have them. I know I've been a member of the social media club and it's been here within Kansas City. It's been a challenge. And we had one networking happy hour at Iron District for Ad Club in the last couple months. It's been a really challenging year for, as you mentioned, we're social animals and social creatures, and not being able to get together for luncheons and breakfasts and having to do it all virtual. We're glad we've been able to fill a little bit of that void by being able to just participate, in this with us, but we're anxious and really eager to get out and see you all again too. So thank you for listening to the show.
Definitely. Don't stop thinking about your career and just, we'll get there. We'll get there eventually. Wear a mask, social distance, wash your hands.
Wash your hands. And we'll keep this conversation going.
For sure.
So thanks for joining us this time. We look forward to having you join us for future shows. And it's looking like it's going to be some emotional analytics with Grant Gooding. All right. Take care, everyone. If you found value in today's episode, check us out on our website, CultivatedMarketer.com. You'll also be able to subscribe to us, rate us, and leave us a comment on your favorite podcast platform, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher. Remember, a garden of opportunity grows with Cultivated Marketer.